at the moment, but I am hearing that the numbers are rising. So
great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody who's watching. Please feel free to ask any questions. Jessica, our virtual support specialist, is behind the scenes. Virtual services specialist, whoops, is behind the scenes and is going to be helping facilitate the conversation that way. So as we mentioned, today we're going to be talking about burnout and how to maintain, boundaries, what even burnout is, and how it can look different for absolutely everybody. So I just wanted to kind of start things off, just a couple fun facts. So burnout was actually not a term that was used prior to 1974. And a lovely gentleman by the name of Herbert, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly at all, but Freudenberger, wrote a paper all about burnout, the high cost of achievement. And since then, over the last, oh my gosh, that's almost 50 years.
Hey, that's the year I was born.
I was born like the next year, Tammy. So it's like really not. So I think what's interesting when we talk about burnout, though, is that there's a distinct difference between burnout when it comes to work and burnout when it comes to life. So burnout, under the World Health Organization, they've actually classified it as an occupational disease, and it's not medical. However, there's a lot of medical side effects that we see when we talk about burnout. And so the World Health Organization defines burnout as a syndrome. I'm reading, so that's why I'm looking down. As a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So a lot of it absolutely has to do with how we do our work, how we are supported when we do our work. I just want to put a caveat out there by saying this is not us saying that employers are not treating their staff appropriately, or that we as individuals don't know how to speak up. But as a collective in society, there's a lot more pressure, and I'm sure we've seen it, especially over COVID, a lot more pressure to perform with a lot less, and especially a lot less human interaction, like face to face. Obviously, we're doing this virtually, right? So how does that actually play into what we do in our everyday lives? And essentially, how does that make us feel as employees, and what kind of impact can we have? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody want to jump in? Say anything?
Yeah, you know what? Burnout can also be confused with compassion fatigue, which we can talk about maybe in a little bit. But when I think about burnout, and I just listening to your comment about your work not being successfully managed. So I understand that, but I also think it's kind of unfair, because even when I think about the workload these days, how do you manage a workload when things are just put into your lap? So I think about my last employer, and I think about my job and somebody on my team leaving. So now their job is put on my lap. How do you successfully manage that when you are doing 2 jobs for the price of 1? And then on top of that, going home and doing things at home, working at home. So I'm going to say that it's tough, and I'm going to say that a lot of people experience burnout. And the only thing that we can do about it is take a long look in the mirror to see where we're at and ask ourselves the question, what am I going to do about it? And that alone can be challenging, because sometimes we're stuck working at a place that we don't necessarily like. We are feeling burnt out, but we need the money. Let's be honest. We need to pay our bills. We need to feed our families.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Crystal, you said something interesting a few minutes ago. Like you said, your caveat is we're not here to say every employer is, not paying attention to it. But Tammy, you mentioned the idea of, if a person leaves and then it might be worded, well, temporarily, can you do this, right? But if you do take that on and you're really good at it, then unfortunately the employer may see that as, maybe we didn't need that other person. because you know, somebody else is doing that 2 jobs in one, but not getting any more pay. And that's when the burnout starts to rear its ugly head, right? So, yeah.
I can speak. So I work with adult clients at Stride, supporting them around their mental health and their addictions, around their employment goals. And that can look different for everybody. Matt works primarily with youth clients. And there's definitely and sorry, Matt, I'm not going to speak for you or on behalf of you, but there is definitely a sense of I'm being asked to do too much and I don't know how to say no. I don't know, because if I say no, they could just find somebody else to do it. And then, right. So feeling very I don't want to say unsafe in a like physical sense, but more of like a psychological sense. And how does that actually translate? Because if you're carrying this burden over time, it becomes a very heavy burden to carry. And then it comes to, well, people's expectations of you become this much higher. And so then how do you reset those boundaries, right? I myself, I'm horrible at it. I always say, sure, I'll do it. And then, you know, I do it, but then I'm really tired and it's great. It's my own fault. Kind of like what you said, Tammy, you know, I do think a lot of it has to do with ourselves and what part we're willing to take in it. Because I do think it's more than just me. I think it has to do with the relationship I have with my employer, my supervisor, this job, other jobs, any jobs, really.
But I also think, and something that when I'm working with young folks, and young folks will also experience burnout. And when we're talking about that and what that looks like, as I always like to say, an employer is not going to recognize when an employee is burning out all the time, right? There needs to be a certain level of self-advocation coming from the person. So when it comes to preventing burnout, we all play a part in it. So it's important that if it's feeling too much, it's feeling like, you know, you are not able to accomplish, it's causing that stress, it's meeting those criteria you mentioned, Crystal, in your definition there, then, you know, not letting it get to a point where you're experiencing all of those things and starting to speak out and break down some of those self perceptions that we have. I think you highlighted it perfectly, Crystal. I think sometimes, whether it's young people or adults, sometimes folks will put that whole, if I say I can't do it, they'll just find someone else who can for the same amount. When realistically, you would be surprised how often the employer will go, thank you so much for telling me, let's figure this out, because it's actually more beneficial for the employer to maintain a healthy workforce and a longer term workforce. But again, it's hard for employers, especially during COVID times. You know, I always say, for that 2 years where everything was remote, a lot of staff, especially in the tech world, were all virtual. Employers aren't able to see, they're not able to have that same level of check-in. So that's where that self-advocation piece, I think, comes in so important.
Yeah, you know, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In some of my workshops, I talk about the idea of setting boundaries and learning to say no. And I think for a lot of us, we've learned to say yes because we want to make people happy. We don't want to come across as maybe lazy, for lack of a better word, uninterested, not knowing what we're doing. So we say yes all the time. So we're making everybody else happy and not looking after ourselves. But what I try to remind people is no doesn't look like no. If I'm speaking with my manager, I might not say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But I could say something like, I'd like to talk to you about my workload. I'm feeling like my workload is a little extra these days, and I'd like some extensions, you know, these sorts of conversations. But I think, you know, in our brains, when we hear learn how to say no, I think we literally think about just say no when it doesn't have to go that way. And I also think that we need to practice doing this because it might not come naturally, because we are individuals that want to help others. And you know what? When we are in the industry that we're in, we are helpers in different ways.
I think too, Tammy, just to build on what you said there, you said something important there. And I think it's important to also recognize, I think a lot of times what prevents us from saying no or having those conversations surrounding, you know what, this is a bit much. Can we look at, reducing that? Maybe if you're in the IT world, for example, and you have these critical deadlines, seeing if you can get some assistance to meet those deadlines. There's this fear that individuals put on themselves of disappointing others. And that often leads to, everyone's counting on me. I can't let people down. If I don't do this, it's not going to get done. And being able to separate yourself from that and recognize that, it's better to ask for the help and to,
Yeah, and to tie what to both Tammy and Matt were talking about there, that idea of, you're right, Tammy, I don't think you would have the attitude of no, right? But a no can sound like, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that activity or whatever I've been tasked with, and here's why. And if the manager or the boss or whatever you want to call them is listening properly, they will hear that you've got this on this day and that on that day, and you were pulled into something that you weren't expected. And then they go, yeah, I can see why. And then they'll say, let's see how we can lessen that load. Oh, I mean, hopefully, right? Lessen that load, or maybe we'll draw some other people in, because I know the work that you're doing is important and needs to be done too, and I don't want to take away from that. I wonder if I might add. Oh, sorry. Am I supposed to stop when there's a chat?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. I kind of draw this from my wife's work, and I have dealt with this myself. But from my wife's work, she has joined this amazing team. She's self-employed and works for this team out of the US. But every week they have a meeting of their team, and I think it might be 6 or 8 people. And I am sometimes privy, what she talks about is confidential, but we share the same space, right? But the one person leads the meeting and says, how are you doing? And everybody has a chance to sort of say how they're doing. What were the highs in the last week? What were the lows for you in the last week? And people get a chance to talk about the successes and the things that they're still working on and the challenges. But then I think there's a really important question here is there anything that I or we can do to help you individually? And then they start to mesh certain projects that if you took it all on yourself would be incredibly difficult, but with the help of that person, and then when we get to the stage of the project, we'll tap into this person. It's wonderful. And they talk about it in terms of what are your successes, because that positive sharing is incredibly powerful, but also they call them, what are your rocks? The rocks are those challenges, those things that you have to try and go over. And I think I've actually learned a lot in talking to my wife about this, because it energizes her. It really energizes her. And there are days when she has to work till midnight because something is due. But then, they talk about the challenges, and the next week there's a bit of loo time built in, and she can have a couple of hours off or something. So,
Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. That sounds like a great company culture, which I think is also a huge contributor to burnout. The kind of culture that you have to go into every day. I just want to acknowledge there was a comment that came through that said, so much stress can make the brain locked in fight or flight without even realizing it. And I'd also say fight, flight, or freeze, because sometimes we stay in holding patterns. I'm saying we collectively, like we stay in holding patterns because we don't know what to do, because we're brought up in a certain way, or we're conditioned, like Tammy said, to maybe not necessarily be comfortable enough to approach a boss and say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, because there is that fear of either letting people down, or not even, how do you deal with the fallout of saying no, and the what ifs? Well, what if I get fired? What if this? What if that? The anxiety that comes with it. We talk a lot about, in our line of work anyways, in mental health, we talk a lot about how we view symptoms of mental health. And there's some really specific symptoms when it comes to burnout. Again, it will look absolutely different for everybody. I think probably one of the biggest ones is something called presenteeism. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with that term, but it's where you literally go to work, but you really don't do a whole lot of anything. You're just there. You're just taking up space. And it's not because necessarily you don't want to. It's not like, you wake up and you're like, I'm going to go to work and not do anything today. It's not a conscious choice. It's just more just over everything, just completely over it. So you're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever people scroll through, watching Netflix on your lunch hour. That leads into, the whole afternoon. I'm not saying I do that. I'm just saying I've heard that other people maybe do that. There was a study, the American Psychological Association did a study over COVID, and they stated that people who are experiencing burnout at work, 2.6 times more likely to look for new jobs. Obviously, we're entering into what is now known as the Great Resignation era. 63% of people surveyed take more sick days. And I think what was fascinating to me is that out of everybody that was surveyed, 23% actually visit the emergency room because they think there's a physical problem with them. So we know that like anxiety attacks and panic attacks can sometimes feel like you're having an actual heart attack. Still always better to be safe than sorry and get checked out. Just, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of the rule. But that's a tremendous amount of people to show up at the emergency room being like, I don't know what to do. There's something going on. And I think that's quite staggering.
Yeah, we need to listen to our bodies. I think we don't realize how much our bodies speak to us. And for the longest time, our brain and our body have been thought of as being disconnected, but they're so connected. And I can share that as a cancer survivor, when or before I found out that I was ill, my body was speaking to me and I had to listen. And that's what brought me to the doctor. This was happening and that was happening. And every time something different changed within my body, I was off to the doctor. But for some reason, and I'm going to go with stigma, I'm going to go with shame and all sorts of other things, when we are feeling mentally stressed and that stress is affecting us physically, we're not listening, we're not paying attention. When we're getting headaches or migraines, stomach upset, stress in the neck, the back, the shoulders, this is our body telling us to stop.
Yep.
Stop and look after me. Yep. Right. And I think that we need to pay attention because these physical ailments, I think we all know that if we ignore it, they just build up and then bigger things can happen.
Absolutely.
I think you highlighted a great point there, and Tammy, just to kind of move us into another subject of our conversation today, are recognizing those boundaries, right? And using boundaries to kind of say when, enough is enough, when we're hitting those points, how do we, so maybe Crystal, if you want to speak to what boundaries are broad definition of what boundaries are and what they kind of look like.
Sure. Well, and again, I think boundaries can look different for each individual based on their life experiences, where they're at, what kind of work they do, people's personal values. Like there's so many different things. Ethics. We just had an ethics training a little while ago, which was really fantastic, about boundaries and what does that look like. And for me, I think boundaries can change over time as well, based on your coping mechanisms and how you're able to determine your work. I can say 100,000% personally, This is my second career. I was in hospitality for a million years prior to this, and I did not have boundaries. It was like, sure, I'll do it. I'll stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning and do the schedules and all the rest of it because I have to do it. I have to do it. Looking back now, I can recognize like, whoa, that was just not helpful. I can't blame anybody but myself. I'm taking responsibility for it. However, I've had to learn how to change that as I move forward. So is there a definition, like a landlocked definition of boundary? There probably is. But in how I view it, I think it's, what am I comfortable with? Where does my discomfort come in? And is it a place that I can live? Is it ethical? Is it moral? And then if it's too much, how do I approach it? That's probably not the answer you're looking for, but that's kind of how I view it in my head.
I think that's perfect. And Stephen, I think you looked like you might have something to add to that as well.
Yeah. I think I know a couple of people who are entrepreneurs or they're VPs of various corporations. My sister years ago was the CEO of Sick Kids Hospital Foundation. And the way that she said that she figured out how to set boundaries, but also to avoid her own burnout, was to assemble a team of incredibly smart people that she could delegate work to, allow them to suss certain things out. And if an error was made, or hopefully not a major error, but if an error was made, that my sister's role would be to help them figure out how to help themselves, right? As opposed to, well, I better do this because I don't think that they're competent. And when you give, she says, when you give people more, when you empower them and give them opportunities to maybe fail or make a mistake and pick themselves up and dust themselves off, that made her job, I don't want to say her job easier, she still put in a lot of hours, but she surrounded herself with people. In fact, she says she surrounded herself with people who on certain topics and certain aspects of the work, they knew more than she did. She was sort of the overseer, but earlier in a previous job where she was, a VP of the Canadian Cancer Society, wow, she burned out really quickly because she wanted to do everything herself because she didn't trust the people around her. Now, if she trusted somebody who made a pretty egregious mistake, but it wasn't going to be the downfall, right? That she had to work really intensely with them. And then sometimes her anxiety lay with having to let that person go because they couldn't function.
I think that's a really great point, Stephen. Perfectionism is one of the hugest kind of like recovering perfectionist. Well, I don't know, recovering, still doing, I don't know. I do a lot of productive procrastination too. If anybody really wants to learn about that, it's fun. But feeling that you're responsible for everything and you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Again, a lot of how we operate in our work life has a lot to do with how we're brought up. And again, not talking therapy wise or anything. However, it's important to recognize that some of these things can be pitfalls. Sometimes it can be quite motivating to be like, wow, I did really well on that. But at what cost? I always talk about the wall. There's a wall that eventually everybody will hit at some point. I ran smack into it, even though it kept coming closer to me. I just didn't see it, but I just hit it and went down like a ton of bricks and was down and out for a very long time and had to relearn what that looks like and how to create those boundaries. And it's very difficult. I work with a lot of clients who have been off on a mental health leave and are returning to the same position at the same job. And we have a lot of conversations around boundaries, how to put boundaries in place, how to change the perception of the work that you're doing, especially if you're putting those firm boundaries in for your own mental health and your own wellness. And a lot of it is how to deal with the fallout. I think that's not something that's necessarily talked about enough, that when we as humans change our boundaries, people resist that because they are used to us performing or behaving in a certain way. And so when we change that, that changes their perception of who we are. And so there's a lot of pushback. And so how to deal with that, because that's an additional stress that we don't necessarily think of when we're putting that, okay, hey boss, I'm struggling with project A, B, and C, you know, can we figure that out?
Mhm.
It's very challenging.
So I actually had a question come in prior to our session. I think this is a good point to ask the question. So the question pertains to boundaries and burnout and preventing burnout, but it also has to do with the new provincial legislation that came into place. So everyone may be familiar with the new right to disconnect legislation that came in. And the question was surrounding, what do I do if my employer has not spelled out a clear policy for it and I'm still receiving emails after hours from my employer that require my immediate attention? So again, what would the recommendation of the panel be in that case on how to manage those after-hour communications that are requiring kind of attention? This is from someone who maybe is in a team lead position type role.
Mhm. Well, I love that question. It's a great question. And right off the bat, I will say, what do you do about it? Don't answer or don't respond to the email when you are not supposed to be working. I have worked for an organization that implemented a policy where after a certain time, emails from leaders were not able to be sent out. And that stuck around for a little bit, but after the years had passed, that washed away and we were getting emails late into the night. I think it's also important to remember as well that, and this was pointed out to me by a friend that I worked with, everyone during COVID, everyone had to figure out their own way of doing things. So for example, if we have someone who is maybe a parent and they have to put in their 8 hours, well, maybe mornings aren't so good for them because kids were not in school and they had to feed the kids, do the homeschooling with the kids, etc. And then they worked into the evening hours. So this person was working at night, sending emails at night. And I'm like, that didn't even cross my mind. So something that they started to do within this team was in the body of their email, their email signature, they basically wrote a message that was lovely that said, my hours don't necessarily represent your hours. So if I'm sending you this email when you're not working, and of course I'm paraphrasing,
Right.
please don't feel the need to reply. And if I can just say a couple of more things, I think this comes back again to us looking in the mirror and asking ourselves, why am I online after my shift is over? Why do I feel the need? Who says that if someone text messages me or emails me, where is it written that I have to respond within a half an hour, within 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, again, is coming back to us setting boundaries with ourselves and letting our managers and team know that, you know what, after this time, my laptop is turned off. My work phone is put aside because this is my time, right? And you don't have to have a family per se to have your time.
Of course.
Somebody mentioned this in one of my workshops, and what did he say? He didn't have children. They had a project that moved to another province in Canada. And the manager basically said, well, you don't have any kids, so you can go.
Mm.
How offensive.
Very.
When we're at home, we don't need children to tie us up. We could have pets. We have extracurricular activities, friends. anyways, it's none of nobody's business, you know, what we do when we go home. I think that's, we need to remember that. Anyways, I have all sorts of things to say about this topic.
No,
Oh, go ahead, Matt, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please, Stephen, if you.
If I could just add there, again, I mean, my work life has really changed, because as a teacher, I would tell students, you know, I'm going to have your essays marked and back to you by Friday. Well, I'll piece that together, but I may be having to work late at night, but that's my choice, right? Not my employer pressuring me. Again, back to my wife. I should have had my wife on the call. My wife's company is really amazing in that, and it's the nature of her work, but they can share calendars and they know when they are blocked off with something, and there's no way that you're going to reach them, and there's no way you're going to expect a response. You can send the email and say when you get a chance. There's a portion of the calendar where if it's black, you're not even attempting to send an email or a text. Like Jill will say, okay, after 5 p.m. tonight, you know, my calendar is black, but there will be an hour where she's kind of winding down her night, getting ready, you know, for bed. There's an hour block where she will actually answer, and people can expect a response in preparation for something the next morning. But I like that idea, if it's at all possible. I guess the risk, she says, is that some people black big portions out and you really don't know what they're doing. It's not your business, but then the schedule gets blacker and blacker, and then there's whole days that are black, right? But she will also be given a heads up. Hey, you know what, team? We're all so busy. Could we meet on Tuesday night at 7? And if everybody can, or a few people can, she says to me, go find something to do, because I'm between 7 and 9 or 7 and 10. This is going to be part of my work day, you know? So,
and it sounds like that's a boundary that she's setting for herself and for her team, and that's a collective, right? So I think that's a big difference too.
It's
is that
collective. It's
right when we're
yes,
when we're trying to set boundaries for ourselves, sometimes it's not just I'm going to set this boundary unilaterally. Like we have to sometimes, and especially if we report to individuals, we have to have the buy-in from others. Just something I found the other day, and I posted on Facebook. I just wanted to share it because I think it is hands down probably one of the funniest things I've seen, but so unbelievably true. So I don't know if we can, oh, you know what? I can't do it that way. Anyways, it was posted on Twitter, somebody, Rachel Johanna Strodel. I do not know who this person is, but she captioned it, easily the most relatable email I've received. And it said, need to postpone. Hi, Rachel. I have lost control of the day. That's it. And I was like, oh, that could be my everyday sometimes, I think. So I just wanted to share that because I just think it was very apropos, so to speak.
So we had another question come through from Facebook. Thank you to our viewers. And the question reads, I think people struggle a lot with setting boundaries because it can lead to self-guilt or either not completing the task or having to say no to others. What strategies would the panel recommend for trying to mitigate and overcome that guilt?
I would say practice. So whatever we practice in life, practice definitely makes us more prepared. I'm not going to use the term perfect because there's no such thing, but the more we practice setting boundaries, the better we will get at it. I can share as well, panel, Crystal, Matt, Stephen, everyone listening, that I too used to say yes to absolutely everything, and I loved it. But things change over time. Relationships change. I do have kids. I have a blended family. Life gets busy. I need time. And I've learned over time that when I am good, meaning I'm learning to say no and set boundaries, and my mental health is good, then everybody in my circle is good. So I've had to practice to say things like, I'm sorry, I cannot give your kid a ride to school today. Again, that guilt definitely creeps up on me. And I think guilt comes from many different places. I think it comes from culture. I think it can be learned. I think it also can come from our own insecurities. And the biggest thing that has helped me with guilt in general and just setting boundaries is something called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And the idea behind it is that if we change the way we think about situations, it's actually going to change the way that we react or do certain things, which is then going to change the way that we feel about ourselves and situations. For me, CBT was a game changer, so I would recommend it to anyone.
I agree, 100,000% for me as well. So
I think there's
Yeah,
another.
go ahead, Matt. Sorry, we keep talking over top of each other. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was gonna say, I think there's also another way you can start practicing that when it comes to a professional setting, that can really be helpful too. I would say there are a lot of vast majority of employees who take pride in the fact and will actually quite often talk about the fact that they don't use their sick time during the year. They have access to paid sick days, but they will say, no, nothing will keep me away from my job. I'm there every day.
Yeah,
And
I don't get that.
Exactly. And employers will often say, no, it's there to use it. And it's there to prevent these situations such as burnout. So that's a great spot where you can test and start trying to practice that is take your sick day. If you're not feeling well, if you are feeling like you need to take the day off because you are unwell, take that day and practice saying to your employer, you know what, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do this today. I'm sick, I'm not well, and I need to take the day off. And that's something I think a lot of employees could start using and practicing that have access to those resources, because again, they're there to help with your wellness and help maintain your wellness.
Yeah, and to add to what you said, Matt, taking sick days, using your vacation days if you have any. I also have met people in my workshops that have told me they don't use their vacation days. And practicing to take your breaks and take your lunches.
Yes.
How many
taking
of us,
lunches.
right, work through our lunch or are working on the laptop while we're eating? No, we need to step away. We need to give ourselves that time. And you know what? If we remind our employers know that we're taking a break. So Steve, you mentioned a calendar. Well, at one point, that's exactly what I was doing. In my calendar, I was saying something like Tammy lunch. That way people know that I'm away from my laptop, my computer.
You know, I think that's probably one of the best pieces of advice that I often share with my clients is you need to take your breaks. We need time throughout the day, regardless of the work that you do. We need time to regroup, take a deep breath, you know, nourish ourselves, all of those types of things. And I can honestly say that prior to COVID, I was not the best at taking breaks. I was that person who was eating, talking on the phone, trying to get things done. Now during a lot of Zoom meetings, especially if they're 8 o'clock, most clients will see me eating my breakfast, but you know, it is what it is. But I will shut down my computer at lunchtime and I will physically walk away and I will take my time. Now, I may just go watch Netflix or read a book or I don't know, pack a box or unpack a box as the case may be. But that's something that I've learned is incredibly valuable to myself. And so that's something that I try to share with all my clients as well.
There is an idea, you've probably read this or heard this yourselves, but the idea that some people who will tell others at their place of work or in their personal life, they'll say, I don't take my vacations, I don't take my sick days, I go into work when I'm sick, I stay late, I'm there first. And they're wearing it almost like some sort of badge of honor or badge of courage. But for some, and I guess it depends on the workplace too, some people are really trying to catch the eye of an employer or a manager and like, look at me, look at me, look at me. But Matt, you made a really good point earlier. They may be spending 14 hours at the workplace, and Crystal, you were talking before,
Yeah.
but they're only accomplishing 5 hours of stuff. It looks like they're busy, and they feel maybe like they're busy, but they're, you know, I think we need to get to some sort of a model, much easier said than done, where, you know, we're having less meetings and making a shorter but more efficient day or
Yes.
week.
Mhm.
You know, so of course I'm up on my soapbox here, but it is something to think about, right?
Well, and
So
there's a lot of companies out there that have already switched to like the 4-day work week, which is very,
Yeah.
very popular
Yeah.
over in Europe and many parts of the country.
yeah,
So you're working a bit of a longer day, which may or may not be feasible for some people based on their personal situations, but then you have that break. Because I don't know about you, but if you have 2 days off, the first day is kind of like, oh, you know, I got to do this. And then the next day is worrying about, well, I just got to go back to work tomorrow. There's no like actual rest involved.
Right.
So
yeah,
But I will add to that is part of the point. We need to get to a place
mhm.
where we are looking after ourselves on a daily, not waiting for those 2 days. And something that I talk about in our compassion fatigue workshop is transition time. Research is showing that the best time to look after ourselves, practicing self-care, whether that be eating, exercising, talking to a friend, walking the dog, doing whatever you want to do, is before and after your shift. So I want everyone that's on here right now, think about what you could do for yourself for 15 minutes before you start your workday, and what can you do for yourself 15 minutes after your workday. It seems like a very short amount of time, but if we're doing that, plus taking our lunches, plus taking our breaks, I think we would be in a better place when the weekend does roll around.
We do have another comment or another question here that says, when you have a lot of roles and responsibilities, so for example, you're working, you're going to school, you have family, you volunteer, etc., how do you ensure that you maintain work-life balance to maintain your overall health and wellness? This is the reality of a lot of us, right?
Yeah, and so I'll go back to the point that I just made.
Right.
Transition time, taking care of yourself before and after. I think guilt kicks in for a lot of people when it comes to looking after ourselves as well. We feel guilty for some reason to go and get a pedicure, or talk to a friend, or go out to dinner with friends because we feel the need to, you know, do laundry or make sure the house is in order. We need to take a step back again and allow ourselves to have some fun, allow ourselves to have some enjoyment. How long are we here for? You know, and if I can add, and then I'll stop talking, is when I learned a lesson almost 23 years ago. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I had to leave work, right? My full-time job, I left, I was off for 1.5 years. When I was diagnosed, everyone was very thoughtful. I got some flowers from my workplace, but guess what? They replaced me, right? Someone continued doing what I was doing, and the work continued. And so that taught me a big lesson, and that has stuck with me ever since, is that work is work, and work will always be there. Our lives, our health may not be.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. Just another comment came in, and the comment was, some employers are asking for doctor's notes when taking a day off. So while we were discussing there, I was just taking a quick look at that as well. And what I could respond to that with is it's important to be aware of what your rights are under the Employment Standards Act. There are rights that you have there. They are often changing. So it is important to, if you have questions about that, is my employer allowed to ask for a sick note, to consult the Act and to consult applicable specialized resources who can help explain that a little bit more. But yes, you do have rights under the Act as well. And a lot of folks don't realize that there are protections there for sick time under the leave, or under the Act rather. So it's important to be up to date on that, and what your rights are.
I think there might be, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but based on what you just said there, Matt, I mean, I'm not as familiar with legislation and all that, but I have been hearing conversations, maybe reading different things, but that there is a bit of a disconnect in that, I want to be sensitive with my language here. Some people who are more seasoned, hopefully I'm not, I don't want to put myself into this group, but there is a sense that the younger generation, however you want to define that, have, I think it's fantastic that we're at least opening up conversations about mental health, and the stigma is lessening. You know, there's a lot of work still to do, but hearing employers or managers or if we want to even use the term old school, you know what I mean, saying, well, some of these younger people are just using this as a crutch, an excuse, because they figure they can get away with saying, I need a mental health day, and that nobody would question it. Well, you know, in my day, we used to push through, and and I think that that's an unfortunate sort of conversation I've been hearing. Yes. In that, you know, if you're physically ill, or you got the flu or whatever, then it makes sense that you would take a day off. But if you're just completely overwhelmed, some people don't see that as a reason to be able to take a day off.
It's absolutely a reason. It's a reason, because that one day that you're off to, maybe, I'm going to say, sleep, rest, unwind, can make all the difference the next day, going back into the workplace more focused. And you know what, over the years, I mean, more research is showing that there is a connection between our brain and our body.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, oh, sorry.
I was just going to add quickly to what you said, Tammy. I think more and more employers as well are recognizing that, and there's been a shift in language surrounding it, where employers are starting to refer to it less as sick days and more as wellness days, or
I like that word,
wellness day.
So recognizing that, having this paid time off, or sometimes it's unpaid, unfortunately, with some employers, but still having the option for these days off, we often think physical health, it has to be, you have a cold, or you have a headache, or you have something else. But more and more employers are starting to recognize, you know what, mental health is a significant factor there, and that's where they're losing a lot of their workforce. So they need to focus more on that, especially where there's a frontline element. You look at, retail, fast food, and things like that. The turnover rates are pretty significant, right? So,
well, and I think it's fascinating too that I'm of the generation, and was definitely taught by my parents, that you go to work. If you're sick, you go to work. Like, you make that effort. Even if you go to work, you're sick, they see you're sick and they send you home, at least they know you made the effort, right? Like, that's very much what I was taught when I was growing up. It's all about the work ethic. That's what you have to do. I've had to learn that it's okay to not go to work. Like, that was a really big learning curve for me. My son, who just finished grade 9, first year, he has been taking mental health days for probably the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously, he knows what I do, and he knows how important mental health is. And we have those conversations. Now, there's rules. He can't just take it because he feels like it, or if there's an exam or those kinds of things. But if he's really feeling like, I cannot handle one more class like, okay, then we talk about it and we put a plan in place. And I'm okay with that because I think that that is teaching him a really strong boundary that he's going to be able to carry forward as he moves forward in life. Or I hope so. Anyways.
And I think that's you highlighted that great, Crystal. You know, we need to also be examples for other folks, and that kind of ties into so there was a question that came in. How would you help someone who is burnt out but doesn't realize it or will not seek support from health professionals? And quite honestly, sometimes it is modeling behaviors, right? So again, if you feel that someone in your life may be experiencing burnout, maybe approach it from your own lens and your own perspective. It's okay. That's oftentimes in when we're talking about mental health, how you can open a door is by, if you're comfortable and you have a relationship with this person, sharing some of your own lived experience and not expecting, you can't share expecting them to right away share with you their perspective, but it at least creates a space between you and it brings them into a conversation, right? And you would be surprised how often if they hear you saying, you know what, I had a really, really, really difficult little stretch just now at work. I think I'm going to take a week of vacation because I really need it because I'm feeling a bit burnt out. Maybe that simple messaging can help them go, oh, you know what, me too. Maybe I need to try to take a week too, and at least start engaging in some of those thoughts and things. I'm not sure if the panel would like to also.
Well,
Well,
something,
go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead, Steve.
That's good, Matt. That's really good because that modeling is important, and they may not jump to that conclusion. They're like, oh, what a wimp, he has to take a week off. You never know, right? But depending on the relationship. But one strategy that I mention in some of my workshops, specifically around mindfulness, is that question about how would you help someone. I have suggested to a number of people, including my own family members, and I do it myself, so I do like to model, is to have them do some journaling. Some people are not interested in that so much, and they don't know what it is or how it can be helpful. But I had this conversation not too long ago, and I said, you know, burnout has a few different sub-levels to it. And burnout I think we understand the concept of burnout, and we've talked about it for the last nearly an hour, but burnout can be seen as an umbrella term, and that can lead to a variety of other things like freak out. We talk about it as the 4 outs. Freak out, and that's not good for anybody, including yourself. Tuning out, and that's where tuning out and spacing out, essentially, you're not engaged, you're not dealing with your family, your friends, your environment, your work, and it becomes an overriding thing. But what the journaling allows you to do is to writing down, you can do it however you like, but writing down, how did my day go? How was I feeling? At what times of the day was I feeling like this? And then you can start to see the patterns. And you could actually share that, if you felt comfortable, share that with somebody, whether it be a professional or just a person in your personal life. And I freaked out. Oh, geez. And then 2 days later, I freaked out. And you start to see the patterns, and you can start to see, okay, how could I take a step back here when I'm feeling like I'm about to freak out? And I can get control of I don't want to say control of my emotions, but I can self-regulate.
Right.
That I can then choose the behavior. I may not be able to choose the feeling or the emotion or the thought, but I can create a little bit of space to be able to respond or react to that situation. And what people are finding, and I'm taking a course right now myself called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. We talk about that all the time. Taking that space to actually figure out what your response will be, and very often your behaviors start to become less knee-jerk, and then you do something knee-jerk, and people are not happy with you, and then you get burned out, and it just becomes overwhelming. That the journaling can be for some people incredibly powerful.
That's a great tip. I'm conscious of the time. Sorry, Matt. I'm conscious of the time. So if the panel would love to give your best advice for maintaining work-life balance, like what would your best suggestion be? Something that you've maybe tried or that works really well for our audience today.
So something that I have learned to do is schedule time. And that's for a lot of things. So in the beginning of the year, something that I like to do for me is get massages. So in the beginning of the year, I actually book my massages for the year because everything's online. And then yeah,
it's like the best thing.
Right. And I know instead of waiting till I'm hurting, I just book them, 6 weeks apart. So that's something I do, but also scheduling my me time in my calendar. So I know when I'm going to see a friend, when I'm going to go, to do this, breaks, transition time. And one more thing, talking to somebody about, how we're feeling.
It's good. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah, that's great, Tammy. And I'll just quickly say that, self-care should not be seen as selfish or self-indulgent. And there is a post I stole from a friend of mine that I think really summed it up well for me. And a few people have mentioned that they like that post I sent out, was if we don't take care of our own wellness, then we're going to have to deal with our illness.
Yep.
I think that's important to remember. Yeah.
I think for mine, it is holding ourselves accountable to our me time. When we think about employment, there's always going to be things holding us accountable to our work time. We need to hold ourselves accountable to our me time. And if we notice we're not getting our me time in there, we need to look at the reasons why, and we need to make it a priority. A trick for it is if your workday finishes at, say, 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. every day, then make plans for right afterwards. Or if you need an appointment, make it for right afterwards. Because if you have an appointment, if your workday finishes at 5 and you have an appointment at 5:30, you're going to finish your day on time. And it's easier to break away and disconnect when you've now gone and done that.
I think that's great. My big piece of advice would be treat yourself with self-compassion, and be okay with not being okay. It's kind of funny, Jessica, our VSS, who's helping us behind the scenes here, that's actually on her shirt today. But letting go of how I think I'm supposed to be and being who I am and being okay with that. It's an evolving process. Definitely an evolving process. It changes day to day, sometimes hour to hour, but being okay with that. So that being said, I would love to thank Stephen and Tammy for joining Matt and myself today. If anybody is interested in learning more about burnout and how it has become quite an epidemic, there's a fantastic book out there written by Jennifer Moss. It's literally called The Burnout Epidemic. If you haven't heard of her, she is a workplace wellness expert, writes tons of stuff, does a lot of work, especially around mental health. So not being promoted or anything, but just saying it's a great book. So if you're looking for something like that, and if anybody has any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Stephen and Tammy's contact information will be posted up on our website, our Facebook and Instagram. And I just want to thank everybody again for joining us today. Sometimes I think we need to have these live at 5s last like 3 hours, because especially when we have lots of people like myself who love to talk. But I thank you again so much for joining us. I know it's the end of a long work day for all of us. So we definitely appreciate and value the time that you've chosen to give us today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was nice to see all your lovely faces.
All right.
And thank you to our watchers, our viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Be
Bye.
safe.